Okay, so I'm going to just be talking about how you innovate internally, or rather, well, how we innovate at Instructure, and a suggestion for how you can innovate in your companies. And I'm going to be talking about making bets and taking road trips. So first, by way of introduction, so this is me. I spent some time, my background's in technology. I've spent some time at a number of companies. A long time ago, I used to be a software engineer, but I've evolved into something less useful. I'm the CEO of Instructure, and we are a learning management system company. We were founded in 2008, and we launched our flagship product, Canvas, in 2011. And then about a year and a half ago, we went public on the New York Stock Exchange. We've got thousands of customers. We're actually now in two major markets. We're in the education market. We're also in the corporate market, where we have a learning management system called Bridge for corporate use, and we have Canvas for the education side of the market. We're also in K through 12 school districts domestically, as well as an international presence in Sydney and in London. And we actually have over 1,000 employees. So it's a reasonably substantial operation that we have at Instructure. And the technology is all cloud-based. We've been very disruptive domestically in the learning management space against Blackboard, who's the pioneer in this industry. And it's been a lot of fun. So this is kind of just a curve. We don't disclose exactly how many customers we have. But our products, Canvas, Bridge, Arc, and you can see our growth is really just up and to the right. And it's been a lot of fun. The management team, we've got a full management team. We don't take ourselves terribly seriously. These are all representative of different hobbies that our managers have. Our CFO there, Steve Kaminsky, if you can't tell, he's a big fan of the Grateful Dead. And the culture at Instructure is probably the most important thing to me, and as well as our investors and our customers. It kind of makes us who we are. InstructureCon is our conference that we have every year. That'll be July 25th in Keystone, Colorado. There'll probably be, I don't know, 2,000, 2,500 attendees from probably almost 1,000 different educational institutions all over the world. And so if you have interest, please attend. It'll be a lot of fun. People love working at Instructure. I think that's a great way to tell something about a company, is using Glassdoor. Glassdoor is sort of the more friendly version of the .com favorite. If any of you were paying attention to the .com era, there used to be a company, a service called Effed Company that used to keep track of horrible .com corporations and their layoffs and how miserable it was working at these companies. That, I think, eventually went away with the .com era. And now we have Glassdoor, which is a much friendlier version of that really tracks how employees are feeling at their company, how their CEOs are doing. And you know, our employees really like us, and it's reflected well on Glassdoor. So that's if you are researching companies to invest in, or maybe even get employed by or do some partnerships with, Glassdoor is just a great way to go check, to get some insight about what's going on behind the scenes at any particular company. So it's just kind of a nice service. Okay, so let's talk about innovations. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a bet. So what is a bet? It's simply just a small speculative investment in something that you have imperfect information about. And bets at Instructure is something we've been doing really since the beginning. We call them literally bets. And what they are, we basically come up with an idea and decide, hey, let's try this out. And we take a very small fraction of our resources and we make an investment and see how it goes. The other way to do this, aside from bets, is really just trying to turn a boat around. And this is a common mistake people make. I'll give an example. Back in 2013, if you recall, about every 3 days, the New York Times would publish an article saying, MOOCs are disrupting education. And the world is ending, and it's being replaced by MOOCs. And it was an exciting time in the ed tech market because everything was changing because of MOOCs. That was an opportunity for companies to be introspective and decide, gee, should we become a MOOC company? And some people did decide to do that. They said, hey, let's change everything because this is the hot new thing. And in turning the boat around, all sorts of disasters can happen. At Instructure, of course, we were paying attention like everyone, and we said, you know what? Maybe the world's changing. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Let's take a tiny, tiny fraction of our resources and make a bet on MOOCs. And that's kind of how we think about innovation and taking risks, is piecemeal at a time. In Sweden in 1967, this photograph is actually a photograph of the morning of the 9th of March called Dagen H, and that just means H Day. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. It's like Hoger traffic something something something. Are there any Swedes in the audience, by the way? Are there any Swedes? You never know, right? I mean, this. But this is the day they decided to change from driving on the left to driving on the right. And it didn't turn out terribly well. They prepared for months to try to educate drivers. But at the end of the day, when you make change, big change, this is not surprising what happens. I'm sure all of us have worked in organizations where suddenly the leadership says, all right, we're doing this now, and then chaos ensues. And sometimes that's actually the death of the company from radical changes coming from the top. Eventually things worked out, and I haven't been to Sweden, but I understand they've got the right side driving working pretty well. This is a bet template. This isn't the one we use at Instructure, but it's effectively the same thing. You start out with a hypothesis. You describe the experiment. You put in some checkpoints. You put how much it's going to cost. And then each department has to weigh in sort of what they're going to contribute. The hypothesis is simply something like, if we do X, then some good thing will happen by some date. And that's it. Like, for example, you can say, hey, you know what? We think the K-12 market in Spain is exciting and interesting, but we're not sure. Let's make a bet. Let's put one salesperson there for 4 months, and we'll give them a $250,000 budget, and we'll see what happens. And we think if we do that, we can access a $4 million market. I'm completely making this up. I actually have no idea what's going on in Spain in the K-12 market. But that's an example of a bet. But then after you make that decision, you have to go to each department in your company and say, look, we're making this bet. You need to help out. And pretty soon you put together, you fill out the form. And then you're able to say, all right, we have an actual bet. It's not just something the CEO or the COO just came up with and announced someday. You actually have an organizational focus on execution. This is an operational bet. It's not a whim. And so this is how bets work. And we probably do about, I don't know, we're operating about half a dozen bets at any given time within Instructure. We have an annual bet budget. It's just a few $1 million. It's set aside in our budget because we don't know what the bets are going to be over the next 12 to 24 months. And so we set aside a little bit of money for that. And you know what? If we have money at the end of the year, great. If we don't, heck, sometimes we go through our bet budget and we need to find money elsewhere if we think the bet's important. But these are all very small, incremental resources that we're dedicating to this. Final word on bet, Dwight Schrute. I love this quote. Whenever I'm about to do something, I think, would an idiot do that? And if they would, I do not do that thing. And frankly, I think if more people followed this advice, they'd be more successful, quite simply. All right, let's talk about road trips now. All right, what's a road trip? Well, I'll tell you what a road trip is not. And I'm talking about interfacing with customers. How do you develop new products and know what to build next? This image here is people talking to customers on a Polycom, right? We do that a lot. Everyone does that a lot. What's the easiest way to interface with customers? You call them up. Maybe you do a video conference even. What is really important, though, is to get on the road, to get in front of customers and to talk to customers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that process and how we do that at Instructure. In fact, Instructure was founded on this process of going out and talking with customers. Back in, I guess it was 2008, 2009, the founders, a couple of grad students, actually got in a car and drove all over the western United States, visited nearly 24 universities, and met with CIOs and provosts and instructional designers, and sat down and showed what they were working on and had these meetings. And it took them months to do this. When they came back, I was working with them at the time. I was the initial investor in Instructure. They came back with a stack of transcripts, verbatim transcripts. I mean, they took like a court reporter verbatim they weren't notes. They were, and I looked through all these transcripts, and I just read and read and read and read. And I was really blown away by what I found. I was intrigued. And I said, you know what, guys, tell me, how was the trip? What would you do differently? And they just said, well, next time we're renting a car with air conditioning. It didn't occur to me that, I had forgotten what it's like to have no budget. And it didn't occur to me that they actually drove for 2 months, but that's what they did. So this is a traditional way to develop products and innovate, is there's hype, you have a gut feel, you're inspired. You say, hey, I think this would be cool. Let's go do this. Let's build this thing. And so you start doing and you're really confident. You think it's going to work, right? And so what you do is you start investing in engineering and in marketing. You start doing some due diligence. You make those phone calls on the Polycom, and you take notes, and you think you know what you're doing, and then you say, okay, let's commit some resources to this. Let's start building it. And so you take 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or 2 years to build the product. And then after you build it, you kind of wind down R&D and you ramp up your marketing and you launch it. And then what happens is customers start using it, your sales reps start selling it, and suddenly you have real evidence, alarms go off, and you're disappointed. They say, this is really okay, but we really need these 5 features before we buy it. Really? And what becomes successful? Version 2.0 of the product, not 1.0. 1.0 got your foot in the door, but you really have to do a whole lot of work because now you've got real customer feedback. You have real challenges in selling. You have real obstacles to overcome. So this is pretty normal. I've experienced this. I think everyone has experienced this if they've tried to get a product out. And it's sad. But that's what venture capitalists are for. You just go back to them and say, hey, I need more money. It didn't work out the first time. And they write you another check, and you give it a go. I'm going to share with you a slightly tweaked model that works quite well. And we've used this many times at Instructure. I've used this many times in my career. You start the same, of course, with inspiration, hype. You get excited about something. Same thing, you ramp up. But what you do next is important. That's when you get in the car and you go and visit these customers. Not with a product to share, because you don't have a product. You haven't built a product. But what you create is effectively a virtual product, usually in PowerPoint. Every single button works. You click on it, it goes to the next screen. You click on it, it goes to the next screen. Yeah, I mean, that's simple. You don't even need engineers to do that. You can just sit down and build this crappy-looking product yourself. And if you want to pay a little bit of money, they can polish it up. But what you're trying to do is figure out literally what the product is that you want to build, the minimal viable feature set you can get away with, and simply put that in front of customers and say, would you buy this? I don't have it to sell you. I got nothing to sell you. But would you buy this? And you have to try to get really honest, candid feedback. That is, I think, one of the most precious commodities in any tech venture is candor. People don't want to tell you, no, I don't want that. They don't want to hurt your feelings. They say, well, it's okay. You need to understand what works and what doesn't work. And this is the tough part, and the only way you can do this is by looking in their eyes. You have to be there in the room with them. So this process is involved. It takes many, many, many months, lots of visits. I'd suggest meeting at least 24 customers, maybe 36 customers. At some point in the process, again, take verbatim transcripts. There's a grading process involved. You can talk to a lot of customers that aren't sophisticated, and then you can talk to customers that are very sophisticated. Oftentimes, the sophisticated customers give you really bad critical feedback. The ignorant ones say, oh yeah, I think this will work. And you want to listen to these guys and not these guys, but then if you build their product, ultimately the market's made up of sophisticated buyers and you're disappointed. You have to be honest with yourself as well. So there's a much more involved process that's beyond the scope of this talk, but you go through that process. You get your alarm and your evidence and your disappointment first. This is really the key difference between the previous slide and this is you get all that negative feedback before you make the big investment. You get the bad news first. And this is really hard to get your product team and your engineering team and your sales team and your marketing team involved in this because they want to hope it's going to work out just fine. You have to keep digging till you get kicked in the teeth many, many, many times. And after you've been beat up really badly, then you can say, I think we're ready to build a product. Okay, that's what you really want, right? You want to have that failure first, and that's the real success. After that, then you go ahead and start developing. You start coding your product up, and then afterwards, you start your ramp. If you've done a good job, you already have beta contracts in place, because you've got those 6 months, 12 months before in the due diligence process. And then you can really take off, and the version 1.0 of the product is not a surprise to your customers. It's not a surprise to the market. It's what they told you to build specifically and what they said they'd buy specifically. And then you have a great time. It works out. Okay, that's all I really have to share today. It's just these two little tidbits to give you some insight and Instructure on how we do things. And now we have just a few minutes for questions. And if we don't have questions, we get the schedule back on track a little bit. We've got about 5 minutes. Are there any questions or comments?
Hi. How do you feel about responding directly to what customers say they need versus interpreting their need to be thinking basically ahead of what they could vocalize themselves?
Yeah, okay, it's very nuanced, right? Because many customers, first of all, don't know what they need. And second of all, when they tell you what they need, it's the old adage where, hey, if Henry Ford listened to customers, he, would have built a better horse cart, right? I mean, so you gotta balance that. That's why you take verbatim transcripts of what's happening, and then you also have to evaluate how sophisticated is this customer. Is this customer our target, or are they sort of not really our target? There's a lot of factors, but you have to evaluate each one of those, and literally there's a grade book we use. And we grade those customers, we look at the transcripts, we handpick the pieces, and then after we've got 2 or 3 dozen pieces of data, we could actually say, you know what, I think this does make sense. There's a lot of interpretation of the tea leaves, but you've got to get that solid data. So it's a balance. Sometimes we say, you know what, it turns out that they simply won't buy it. This industry will not purchase this unless we have this critical feature. And other times we say, you know what, we know they say that, we're going to take a gamble. And we're going to say that's stupid, and we're not going to do it. And you see what happens. But yeah, it's a balance. There's no trick. Other questions or comments? Yes, in the back.
Josh, what comment would you have on earlier stage companies? What comment would you have on earlier stage companies seeking meetings with vice provost? It's a little bit hard to get.
Well, yeah, I used to think that. But I can't believe these 2 grad students, when they drove around the country, it was the summertime, maybe vice provosts are less busy in the summer, they showed up to campuses And they just would walk into the big administrative building and say, hey, we want to talk to someone. And they got passed around, and eventually they got to the people in charge. And honestly, I wasn't there, right? I was at home. You know, they were out on the road, but they hustled. I mean, they hustled. That's it, right? I think one of the important things is they say, we have nothing to sell, right? That's new. Or you want to talk to me, but you don't have anything to sell? What are you doing? But if you're saying, look, we have technology and innovation, and we want your feedback on it, we have nothing to sell, but do you want to be part of this process? That's an unusual offer. And they got a lot of people taking them. So yeah, I think it's a lot of hustling and not selling. Other questions? Yes?
In regards to the higher ed sector versus the corporate sector in your products, with online, web-based use of the LMS and the mobile use, what do you see as the trends in both of those?
The trend in online versus mobile? Yeah. Well, I mean, the majority of our customers use the regular, browser-based experience with a laptop or desktop. I think the numbers, if I recall, don't quote me on this, somewhere 20 to 30% are accessing these systems via a mobile device. Now, for years, it's been projected that mobile use will go to 300%. I mean, people just have been really excited about mobile. But it hasn't happened. It's been kind of slow and steady. Corporate and academic use are radically different. On the academic side, they live in the application. They live in Canvas. That's where they live as a student or a teacher. On the corporate use, every quarter, oh no, I got to go and get OSHA compliance training or whatever it is that you get in, you do it, you get out. You don't live there. So very different, but mobile continues to be a non-majority of the access. But I've got teams internally that are watching, plus or minus whatever percent every quarter on quarter. But over the last 6 years that I've been involved in the industry, I haven't seen the mobile avalanche that's been predicted. It's just a strong subset. Any other comments? All right, we're 2 minutes ahead of schedule now. Thank you.